Alright, so we got another video for you. We're going to be kind of covering a few different things. I'll touch on the life coaching topic once more, and then we're going to dive back into Jodi's timeline with some new information that I think fills in the gaps a lot more. I'm really excited about it, and also after doing a lot of digging, a lot of digging, I feel like I finally stumbled upon some of the origins and actually some of the places that Jodi drew reference from at the very least. Also, we're going to be touching a little bit on the ConneXions classroom and ConneXions mental fitness trainers. Found just a little thing I'm going to kind of just glaze over a little bit, but it's pretty juicy. It's all juicy. I think it's going to be good. I haven't seen much of this out there yet, so yeah, let's dive right in and let's get going because I'm freaking pumped about this. Let's go. Alright, welcome to my channel. At this point, I'm definitely under the scope of commentary. I am not really sure what my genre is going to be specifically, if any at all. But, yeah, for now, we're going to be covering this Jodi situation for a little bit. And I think some other stuff involved with this, maybe. The roots of this tree go deep, so... yeah, I'm always surprised at some of the stuff I'm finding. But nonetheless, I did want to start off with doing the coaching tidbit and just kind of touch on a couple more points, maybe expand just a little bit more. I'm not going to spend much time there. I do want to hop right into the juicier stuff, but I wanted to touch on it. So... before we jump all the way in, everything in this video is opinion and all alleged and speculation based off of the information and research being done. I do strongly recommend that everybody go and make their own opinions and do their own research. Be sure that we're spreading the correct information. So, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and play a couple clips from the 2019 podcast that Eternal Core did with Jodi. It's like Ken and Tom, I think their names are. I'll play more of this later throughout the video too. It all ties together, but these particular little clips just kind of highlights some of the points that I want to make about life coaching. So we're going to start there, and then we'll move on to the juicier stuff.
What does it normally look like? What are the milestones as you're working with someone? You know, what do you do first, roughly? What do they have to realize first? Is there sort of a common pathway, or is it all over the map?
Yeah. So what I do is when someone is interested in working with me, is I will just take an hour and a half and just hear where they've been. And most people come in with numerous diagnoses, and I just listen to their history. I ask lots of questions, gather information, and what I'm listening for is their distortion in comparison to how much truth they understand. And then I just put in my mind, I put all the diagnosis stuff over here and all the therapy, and I put it over here to the side, and I just start teaching them. I start teaching them about what impeccable honesty is, what rigorous responsibility looks like, and what vulnerable humility. So by the time they leave a 50-minute session or an hour and a half session, they have concrete tools that they can use against their own distortion.
Wow.
And then we just start from there.
That's beautiful.
That's beautiful.
What's their usual first challenge? Where do they start pushing back? Like the wealthy guy. I mean, I'm probably asking crazy questions.
Well, he pushed back and said, I'm going to get you fired.
Yeah.
And I'm glad he was not successful, Jodi.
Thank you. Me too. Me too. So the pushback is several sessions down the road when we have a little bit more safety between the two of us. And then I start going after their distortions because they like hiding behind their distortion. Like, I can't, or this is too hard, or, I've been clinically depressed for 20 years and that's just the way I am. Yeah. And so I start really digging at those distortions and pushing on them. And the people who are afraid to not take responsibility, they're the ones that push back. People who are in pain and they want solutions, they welcome this stuff. It's like, the Hallelujah chorus when I start teaching them, because they immediately recognize truth. They're like, that makes so much sense. And oh my goodness, why has nobody ever told me this before? And that's as simple as this is. I'm like, well, it's simple in theory. Just get home and start practicing it. You're going to see how hard it is. And yes, it is simple. But that's usually the people that push back, or the people who do not want to take responsibility for themselves. And they'll either work through it or they'll leave. They'll self-deport, which is fine, because I'm not interested in working with people who don't want to change.
Love it.
Okay. So, first couple of things on this. And like I said, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this, and then we're going to jump straight into the rest. But in this clip, it kind of it highlights the fact that the first thing that Jodi really talks about in her process is that she'll sit down with him and listen to him for like an hour, hour and a half, that's good as long as you're listening to them. But she specifically says that she's already got an agenda and she's sitting there looking for distortion. So she's not going to be listening to what you're actually there for. She's only going to be listening to what she wants to hear from you. And it was just going to make you feel like she's listening to you, because she's listening for all of the stuff, the little cues and triggers that she wants to capitalize on. And then, and then we're going to go straight into teaching you about principles of truth and distortion and brainwashing you pretty much immediately. But obviously this isn't going on like that intensely. It's probably a slow burn, slow and steady, depending on the person. And she probably has gotten really good at gauging how well certain things are going to be received by certain people. So yeah, big red flag there, because there is no master-student relationship in coaching. There should never be an imbalance of power in coaching. My really good friend is a coach. It is something that I'm currently working on getting my own certification and getting my own thing started up. So yeah, I have a little bit of a bias to it, but I also come from a place of like, genuinely, I always wanted to do psychology, and I always wanted to be a counselor. At my stage in life now, I was thinking about it, and I said, nothing against any of that, but I don't necessarily want to be helping people fix their past and their trauma and their problems. I find that I want to help them meet their goals, better their future, show up the way that they want to show up in life, in their relationship, in their job, and everything. I mean, that's the scary part about the situation here with Jodi as well, is that the language at the very like basic level, where mostly you'll see it in her marketing, markets the things that coaching is about. Yes, but then you get in there, you don't know necessarily what coaching is, but you got this great idea being marketed to you, and why not, right? Like the Brittany interview. And she said, well, why not? Why not give it a try? If it's promising all these wonderful things, why not? And if you haven't seen the video with Brittany from K2 News, Salt Lake, I believe it is, I'll have the link in my description down below. All right, so we're going to kind of restructure the timeline of Jodi, because there's just a few things now that I want to add in and kind of fill in the gaps. I'm going to go through the first ever video that I found on ConneXions Facebook back in 2017. We're going to go through a podcast of Jodi on Eternal Core in February of 2019. And then I'm going to pull up some posts from the ConneXions Facebook page as well of Jodi back in like 2013-14 time frame. As you kind of saw some pictures roll through on the first set of clips, kind of highlighting some of the other stuff I found during that same time frame. And then we're going to take a look at, there is some information from like a Reddit source that was posted like 4 months ago, so at least a month to 2 months prior to this whole case even coming out. and they were shining some light on some stuff with Jodi. They apparently were best friends with Jodi's son. And from everything that I could see, it's pretty well verified, and the fact that it has all the information in these posts and these comments that have since come out, but it was prior to the arrest even, intrigued me. So if it's false and something has come out where that's been duped and what have you, let me know. But at the same time, some of the stuff, it just lines up, man. It just lines up. So, and then I'm going to end on something that's like speculations. I mentioned origins and stuff. Well, I found something that was like, holy. And also, just because of the flow of all of the events and the timeline and everything, I'm going to touch briefly on the mental fitness trainers and that original little crew of 10 that we saw in a video that I put in my last video. I think it was the one right before that. I mean, I'm pulling all this information from multiple different time frames in Jodi's lives, different interviews she did at different points, but even though it's talking about the same stuff, she kind of tends to like give us more information in one interview and then a little bit more in another. And I've just been piecing all this together, and I mean, my mind is literally, if I never have to listen to Jodi Hildebrandt say another word in my life, I'll probably be happy as a clam. But when this happens, it's worth it. So let's go ahead and dive into this first set of clips.
I'm so grateful to be involved. I'm just going to introduce Jodi a little bit. Jodi did her undergraduate degree at BYU and her graduate work at the University of Utah. She has been practicing how many years here in private practice?
10 years.
10 years private practice. She worked 5 years with Cirque Lodge. It's a drug and alcohol treatment center as the program director. And I think she recognized that there's more to addiction, there's more to healing, and there's more hope to healing. And she went private practice and created this program, which is ConneXions Classroom. She also offers many classes, which Paige will talk about at the end. That's just to show you how big this is going, and it's just a message of truth. And when truth hits, it spreads. There's no other advertising. It's all word of mouth. So tonight, the presentation, we're going to talk about shame and guilt. And just so grateful to be a part of this. And here you go, Jodi.
Thank you.
Krog and Tom Harrison with the Eternal Core podcast. We're excited today to have Jodi Hildebrandt. She's got a massive podcast following, 500,000 people. So we said, look, we want to be on your show next time, but for now she's on our show. Welcome, Jodi. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ken.
It's exciting to have you here with us, Jodi.
Wow, you've got some amazing things, an organization called ConneXions. Can you tell us a little bit about it and how you got involved with all that?
Yeah, so ConneXions kind of was created over a period of about 15 years. And the last about 5 or 6 years, I decided to change the name of my company from Sunrise Counseling to ConneXions because I started learning some principles about how to actually connect myself to God and teach other people how to connect. And so that's when I switched over to the name of ConneXions.
Wonderful. Now, how in the world did you get into podcasting and have this many followers? I'm taking notes here. How'd you do all this? This is pretty cool.
Well, you know what? I lay in bed at night and think, I'm not quite sure how I got here.
Don't we all?
I was spiritually prompted to have a radio show one day, quote unquote, and I knew nobody in radio. And so I went to a family member and said, I need to start teaching people on a massive scale these principles of connection. And I need to get in touch with somebody in radio. And he said to me, well, why don't you have a podcast? And I'd never even heard of that word podcast before. And I said, what is it? And he said, well, a podcast goes to the whole world. It's on the internet. And I said, that is what I need right there. And I went out to southern Utah where I was living at the time and took a little microphone and stood in the desert and recorded my first podcast. And it's gone from there, all word of mouth.
You just did it. When was that roughly, Jodi?
What's that?
When did you do that? How long's it been?
That in the summer of 2014.
All right, so I played a little bit from two different sources. The first one is a ConneXions Facebook video. It's actually the first one I could find ever being posted on their page back in 2017, March of 2017. And that second little clip, it says from the Eternal Core podcast, which we kind of heard a little piece from earlier. That was in February of 2019. Now, both are just kind of outlining, again, the beginning time frame, how ConneXions is born and where this kind of all started. In the 2019 podcast, she talks about how it's been a process of like 15 years of creating it. So if you're talking 2019, that puts you back to 2004. Well, we know in 2004, she's either just entering or been, fresh into her internship at Cirque Lodge. The big thing about this is that she really did, like, her doctrine and her methodologies and all of that, they're all what I'm finding pulled little pieces that just kind of fit whichever she wanted to have going on or wanted to preach. She pulled it from where she needed to pull that information from. Like, a lot of her stuff is dealing with addiction, blowing addiction up onto this bigger scale, applying it to absolutely everything. And that's where she started. She started her work with addiction and addicts. And I mean, she started it in a very luxurious rehabilitation. That made me hone in onto Cirque Lodge. What more could I find out about her time at Cirque Lodge, which proved to be rather difficult. But I did find another section of that 2019 clip, real chunk of evidence or information that I was able to find specifically on her time at Cirque Lodge. But it obviously was very influential for her. And the other little tidbit that I want to go into before we play that snippet for Cirque Lodge is that I find it interesting that she talks about the fact that she changes her business name in 2000. She's talking about 2019, so 2013-14. She says she literally changes her business name from Sunrise. So she was still operating under Sunrise all the way up until that point. And like I had said before, she probably that's what changed everything about her practice, was that whole situation. And I think that maybe it plays into, with the LDS Church, she couldn't get people referred to her for therapy because her license was suspended, and that doesn't look good with the case out there. So let's go incognito. You switch over to life coaching, and we could then still refer people to you for that. And then they, whatever, if you want to still do therapy. That's like literally how I think that all this started to happen. And the fact that this is where I think the LDS Church and the Mormon Church tie in to her continuing to be able to do this and getting so big and growing to a massive scale. So, food for thought on that. Let's jump into this next clip.
And as you learn what those principles mean, and then you choose to live those principles, you will have the outcome of connection. It cannot be controlled. Connection is this byproduct of living in what I call truth. And so I started learning about that when I first started my internship. After I got out of school, I did the school thing, got my license, didn't have a clue what I was doing, but I faked it really well. And that probably was helpful for me because I was humble. I was open. Right. I was constantly saying, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing.
But allowing it to come slowly, as you said, it came slowly, and being open and being vulnerable allows those things to happen. I think a lot of people are frightened of that, but again, that is what allows it to happen. Right. That vulnerability.
Absolutely. It's exactly how I experienced it. And it happened so slowly that I didn't even realize that I was being taught from heaven. And my first client where I practiced these principles was a alcoholic and a drug addict. And he was a multi-millionaire, very powerful man, and nobody confronted him. And I was, late 20s, early 30s. I was nobody in his world, and he was in treatment. And I remember him becoming very angry one day and going off on his wife and his children and blaming everybody in his life for his problems. And I heard very clearly in my mind, confront him. And I was like, I don't know. He's really mad. I don't think that'll be good. And it was, again, confront him. And so I don't remember exactly what I said to him, but I followed that guidance. And I remember him sitting back. I said something along the lines of like, all right, yeah, you've had a hard life. And yeah, this and this and this happened. And your wife loves you and you have 3 children at home. And, and I just started speaking truth to him. And he sat back and it was silent after I got done. And I thought, oh my gosh, what did I just do? I'm going to get fired. And he looked at me and said, how dare you? And I said, that's the truth. What you were speaking was not the truth. That is the truth. And I stood my position. And I really didn't know what I was doing other than I followed guidance. And I knew that I was speaking the truth. And I believe that when you speak the truth, you're connected. And so I didn't have all the pieces together at that point, but I knew that what he was saying was at some level creating sickness in him.
Right.
And then I also watched so many people literally bow to him because of his power and his prestige.
Yeah. So
and his
reinforcing money. That I structure.
Absolutely. And, I worked at a treatment center where there were movie stars and people flew in private jets, and that didn't animate anything in me. I didn't really, they were sick. It's like, do you know who I am? I'm like, no. I know you're sick. Do you want some help? And so it helped that I was not in that eye with them.
Right. And
I about 30 minutes later, and she goes, Jodi, I don't know you. And she said, but you're going to be a really good therapist. Said a few expletives to me. And she said, and don't do that again. Like, don't confront people like that again, because it really upset him. He wants you fired. And as I continued to work with that population, it was the same presentation over and over and over and over again. That arrogance, that entitlement, that false sense of power and importance, when really they were just hurting and they were scared and they were lost. And they barked really loud, but they didn't have any structure or foundation.
But Jodi refused to join him in that structure. And by doing that alone creates a modeling which starts a change.
Right.
And it starts modeling that connection.
Yes.
Where then they think, oh, wow, this is a different connection. I am vulnerable here. I'm not used to being this vulnerable.
But that's where it all started. And, to tell you, 5 years later, I got an email from that man, and he said, Jodi, no one had ever confronted me in my life like that. And he said, and that's why I was sick. You were the only one that had the guts to tell me the truth. And that is why I got well. And I said, well, you were nasty and you were mean and you scared me. And he's like, thank you for loving me enough to tell me the truth. You always were honest with me.
And ye shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yes.
So I've had hundreds of experiences since then. I feel very empowered to speak truth to people because I watch people's lives heal, get connected.
Where do I begin with this? It all started at Cirque, right? She's working with, listen guys, she's working with addicts, drug addicts, alcoholics. These are, in my opinion, it's a disease. And it is, I've lost my own fair share of people. I understand the game. And it is a really freaking crappy experience to have as a family member or a loved one of an addict. It is I don't wish it upon anybody, because you cannot make that person do anything that they don't want to do. And when you are dealing with an addict, these measures that you see show up in Jodi's teachings, I mean, we've seen intervention, right? You create separation if you're a loved one. You cannot enable anymore. If you're the addict, you have to atone for your sins or wrongdoings. Your behaviors, you must take accountability for them. You have to trudge up your past and deal with your shame. That is all a part of drug addiction therapy. But Jiminy Christmas, Jodi, taking it so far as to apply it to couples, young couples searching for help. And I mean, wait, take it a step further and let's go ahead and apply it to children. Children. They have no idea yet. They have no idea. They don't deserve this kind of treatment. That's not how they learn. That's how you create trauma and problems for them in the future, is treating them this way. Like, good God. The fact that she takes this and then amplifies it to this whole indoctrination of needing to heal everybody from all of their addictions, and the fact that it's all in your head, it's your mind. Dude, it's wild to go through this stuff and then like watch it literally just like unfold. And it's scary. It's scary that somebody was able to take this and nobody questioned it. I mean, I guess people who did, just like I kind of referenced earlier, maybe they just couldn't, they didn't see the huge scale that it was going to, probably. And those who were really severely hurt from it probably didn't have any outlets to seek justice or help. And I'm hoping that these people start coming out of the woodworks, because I can't imagine, there's got to be so many. I mean, she talks about it. I've helped tons of people now, and I see it. It's crazy. So she starts by pulling a lot of her foundations from 12-step programs and drug and alcohol addiction therapy. She finds her niche. She finds her vulnerable group of people. They highlight the fact that you have to be vulnerable. It's like it's pure exploitation of the people she's supposed to be helping and servicing. And then I found this post from her back in 2014, at the beginning of like this ConneXions Facebook page and everything, May 26, 2014, and it was just like, I found it interesting. It gives us again a little bit more insight to the beginnings of Jodi and what she was dealing with, because like I've said now a couple times, she's drawing from all of these styles or different types of therapeutic tactics or therapies in general, and then she just like molds them all into this ball of shit that she calls ConneXions. So here, let's go ahead and pull this up. The top part is just going to go over basically the same thing, but they do highlight the fact that she began her clinical work at Cirque Lodge. And then they also say that Cirque Lodge was becoming a national and now is an internationally known treatment facility for drug and alcohol addiction. And yeah, I'll include a little link on Cirque Lodge. Just about its origins, how it was created, which is interesting. Now this part down here is kind of the part that I wanted to kind of focus on. She currently owns and is the clinical director and supervisor of an outpatient treatment program for sexual pornography addictions. So this is still her Sunrise counseling. How you go from a sexual pornography or drug addiction like counselor or anything like that, and then take it in the same swing are the person who knows what truth is. And there's only two ways, there's only two paths, and I know how to live in the path that is the only way, because the other way is not okay. Like, that is, anyways. She has lectured at numerous functions and conferences, including women's conferences at Brigham Young University, regarding the significance of all addictive behaviors. See again. And the devastating effects and how to treat and change behavioral patterns. She has counseled thousands of people, and her unique style of educating about the power of choice and the need for impeccable honesty, rigorous responsibility, and a willingness to sustain humility. It's interesting how that last part has changed so much. Has supported many people to heal in their own lives. Jodi's style is compassionate yet direct and clear of what is necessary to really change and champion any addictive or self-destructive behavior, whether it be scars of abuse or ravenous addiction, feelings of worthlessness or inadequacy, feelings in relation or conflicts in relationships, intimacy problems, communication breakdowns, or any type of block in your life that prevents you from having and creating peace and joy. These concepts will educate you in such a way that you, I know it's cut off here, but it says you will have a different paradigm or angle from which to choose a new view on life. Wow. I mean, man, she is talented. She can do it all, I tell you. Anyways, let's go ahead and jump into the next clip I've got here of Jodi. Again, it's from the 2019 podcast with Eternal Core.
How in the world did you get into podcasting and have this many followers? I'm taking notes here. How'd you do all this? This is pretty cool.
Well, you know what? I lay in bed at night and think, I'm not quite sure how I got here.
Don't we all?
I was spiritually prompted to have a radio show one day, quote unquote, and I knew nobody in radio, and so I went to a family member and said, I need to start teaching people on a massive scale these principles of connection, and I need to get in touch with somebody in radio. And he said to me, well, why don't you have a podcast? And I'd never even heard of that word podcast before. And I said, what is it? And he said, well, a podcast goes to the whole world. It's on the internet. And I said, that is what I need right there. And I went out to southern Utah, where I was living at the time, and took a little microphone and stood in the desert and recorded my first podcast. And it's gone from there, all word of mouth.
You just did it. When was that roughly, Jodi?
What's that?
When did you do that? How long has it been?
That in the summer of 2014.
Wow. That's impressive.
Okay, so that obviously sheds some light onto, how the podcasting came about. I found it interesting when she said that she went to a family member and was talking about a radio show and kind of just how that transpired from there. So while I was looking on the ConneXions Facebook page, I noticed someone commenting on a couple different posts, and I was like, same name, obviously related. And then, we're going to jump in a little bit to this Reddit post, but it came up in some of those comments there too. So I was like, okay, so this is all kind of connecting together then, because I also recalled that on the public records that I had been looking into at the beginning of my research on everything, Jordan showed up on the property as somebody who had lived there before and kept showing up underneath Jodi's public records a lot. So it all makes sense that it was somebody younger that gave Jodi the idea for a podcast. And I stumbled across the comments on Facebook, and then, like I said, I came across the Reddit thread. And I believe the Reddit thread is more relative to everything that started coming out with Ruby, Frankie, and Jodi, with the 8 passengers thing, and when that started blowing up around 2020, 2021, with questioning Ruby's tactics. I'm sure all of those followers, were like, who the heck is this other lady, and did their research, because all of this stuff was posted 4 months ago, which is at least a month at least prior to the case breaking. in the news. So, and this also kind of segues into the next little bit. So let me pull this up for you. There it is there. No, the first portion of this is, I think, referring to like the Ruby Frankie situation, which is interesting. No idea on if she would move in. You know, that's definitely pretty telling, because, you know, in the Ruby Frankie's case, she did definitely move in. Here it says, as far as the extended family, there were a few wild stories. Her niece came to live with her for a bit and got kicked out shortly before her daughter left. I'll come right back to that in just a second. But then it lists here, her nephew also moved in and ran IT for a lot of her stuff and worked for her for a bit. Not sure whatever happened to him. His cousin would play basketball. So, just that little tidbit. So I was like, okay, again, this all connects right back to each other. And so now let's circle back to that first little portion of this comment. Her niece came to live with her for a bit and got kicked out shortly before her daughter left. So, niece, Jessi, and we know now from Jessi's latest interview with Law and Crime, just a lot more details about the whole circumstances situation that they experienced living at Jodi's. In part 2, they didn't get kicked out. They were forced to sleep outside in the snow and were freezing and went to the police. At first, the police seemed like they were going to help them, but after speaking with Jodi, they seemed to change their tune and release Jessi back to Jodi. The abuse got worse and worse, and to the point where Jessi literally felt like they were going to die if they didn't leave. It was life or death. And so they ran away. And the experiences that followed that are just absolutely tragic. Because, I mean, obviously, at this point, too, they didn't have the family to run back to. The family supporting all this BS. So, not maybe not supporting is the wrong word, but they're not doing anything about it. So, it's a passive way. And Jessi talks about that. If you turn a blind eye to abuse, then you are perpetuating it just the same as if you were inflicting it yourself. I mean, there's no excuse for it. I know that Jessi was living there, and then Jessi did also mention in one of their earlier interviews that I don't know if they mentioned that both kids were there, but they did reference the daughter, and that the daughter didn't share much of a relationship. And I know I hinted on that in my previous videos. It's even kind of mentioned in this other post that was the same person in the Reddit, that like the daughter doesn't have any relationship and doesn't want to. And of Jodi's son does state in this other post, I have no idea if she still has a relationship with her son. As far as her daughter, I highly doubt it. She referring to the daughter, left around 2012 to 2013 to go live with her dad. And that was the last I ever saw or heard of her, is what the friend says. Which is very interesting. So it was about maybe 2 years after, somewhere in that 2-year span after Jessi had left, that Jodi's daughter leaves. Also, 2012, 2013, same time all that crap's going down with Adam, and Jodi's losing her license, like a big shift in the, you know, what Jodi's doing in her life, and being kind of, it was an opportunity, I feel like, a huge opportunity, because just 2 years prior to all the stuff that comes out for Adam, the police have Jodi's niece in there begging them to just arrest them, put them in jail. That's how they literally did not want to go back to that house. That's how horrible it was. And the police just ignored that and sent them back. Like, it's so messed up. And the more that I've done research on all of this, it seems like it's a culture. It's definitely like a part of the culture in a way, within these really, really predominantly Mormon and LDS communities. And I mean, that is me. I don't have enough outside research to necessarily like give it in like factual, statistical, you know, representation of that, but it just, I mean, it's overwhelming how much I've been able to find other stuff on similar situations just by doing research on this. Like, I mean, it's there's no shortage. There's no shortage. So basically, bringing it full circle, 2004, Jodi is already starting to develop these methods and ideologies and this doctrine. By 2007, she's ready to embark on her own journey and starting her own practice. And then by 2012, 2013, she has to change gears, it seems, because of everything that happens with Adam. In between all of this, she's still being the abusive self. Fuck. So let's put it all together. 2003, she graduates. 2004, she's in Cirque Lodge doing her internship, working as a program director. And this is when she starts to develop her principles and her doctrine. By 2007, she's branching out on her own, and she's got her own practice, and she is still creating connections from what she explains. By 2012, 2013, ConneXions starts to become a full swing. Her other practice takes a little bit of a hit because of the situation with Adam. Just before the Adam situation, she has everything going on with Jessi, but nothing happens from that because everybody wants to turn a blind eye. And then, 2014, she starts picking up traction with her connections, getting the podcast going out. And she keeps just kind of cooking on that for the next couple of years. And then in 2017 is kind of when we get to the modern day situation. It just kind of grows from there. By 2019, she's got 500,000 followers. By 2017, she's already got 250,000 downloads. And she's in 23 different countries, is what they say. So, I mean, I'll give it to her, man. She definitely did something with her marketing and the word of mouth. But at the same time, I have to make my comment on it that it primarily seems that most of the traction was within the LDS church and LDS church members. And obviously that has to come back to the referral. But so that kind of brings this all the way like present in everything we kind of covered in this. I do want to add a little bit to that time frame. So at the beginning of this video, I had talked about how I might end a little bit on speculation. And basically, while I was doing some research and stuff and trying to find just different podcasts or different speeches or venues or conferences or whatever I could find where Jodi may have spoke and trying to find more information from back then. Not as much. I mean, there's a bunch of information readily available about modern today, the last 3 years. But I wanted to go deeper, even deeper than the last 5 years. I wanted to kind of get to the very beginning. And I was going through all the Facebook posts on ConneXions Facebook. And on one of them, she posted her Twitter handle. I was like, well, dang, man, I haven't checked out Twitter this whole time. I've never looked at Twitter. I'm just never on there. So I go ahead and hop over and take a look. And her thread line's not very long. Her posting was minimal. It only lasted from like 2013 to 2019, maybe even less than that. But anyways, scrolling through, looking at these different posts. And then all of a sudden, here comes this post. I'm going to go ahead and pull it up for us. By Dr. John Bradshaw. It says, "Toxic shame is the greatest block to human development." I kind of almost just scrolled past that at first, but then I was like, I'm just going to go take a look at it. So I am going to reference John Bradshaw and his work. I'm not commenting or drawing any conclusions or opinions on any of his stuff. I more so am just referencing the fact that the language, the shame versus guilt, or adopting this identity in shame. He talks about boundaries and vulnerability and toxic shame and toxic guilt. He talks about codependency, obviously addiction, because that's what he's primarily dealing with, and broken homes and childhoods. It's kind of what I've gathered his topics are on. So let's take a listen, and then obviously, I'll weigh in on it after.
Think about your mom and dad here. How well did they communicate? How well did they ask, for what they wanted and listen to each other and do active and passive listening? What I hear you saying, Jack, is. What I hear you saying, Jill, is. He's going to start developing a negative identity. Like when I hit adolescence, all my shadow side came out. I was this good, wonderful boy that the nuns loved, and I had press in the neighborhood because I was such a good kid. I hit adolescence, man, I found all these guys from broken homes. We were in brothels at 13, drinking. I had alcoholic blackouts by the time I was 15. See, I went into all this negative identity or counter identity. See, a way to have an identity is be different than all these squares. To be a rebel, to be reactive. Toward the end of adolescence, though, I'm still a wounded child. So how am I going to find an identity? Well, in my system, I had been a star and a caretaker. So guess what? At 21, I go to be a priest. Here's a way to solve all the problems. Here's a way to solve it all. This is the way that I can establish an identity. But do you see that it isn't really an identity? It's part of this false self, good guy, people-pleasing, caretaking act that I had been in all my life. Because you see, as a child, every child is trying to figure out, how do I matter here? How do I matter in this family? Well, the way I mattered was by being a caretaker. The way I mattered at school was by being the president of every class, and I won medals. And so by becoming an achiever, and also we have to give this kid permission for sexual play. Now, within your moral limits, please don't misunderstand that, somebody. Within your moral limits, it is really great to be able to play. And one form of adult play is sexual play. One of the places that many of us have been shamed is sexually. We have massive sexual addiction in this culture because of the sexual shame that so many people have absolutely been decimated about their sexuality. We wonder why disorder of desire is the number one sexual problem in marriage.
How does it happen that a child is born and has all this preciousness and this goodness, and then by a certain point of life, they're shame-based, they feel rotten about themselves, their core belief about themselves is that I'm flawed and defective as a human being. Now, every addict, no matter what the addiction is, has that core belief. The addiction to violence, the addiction to power, workaholism, rage addiction, all the addictions that I've been talking about, whatever the addiction is, it's going to be rooted in toxic shame. What you can't do is say no, because what defines addiction is to be out of control. If you're an addict, what you can't do is say no. That's why you're an addict. And if you could control it, you wouldn't be an addict. So the definition of addiction is you can't say no. Little child separates, he needs some kind of balance to know his limits. And what healthy shame is knowing your limits. In fact, healthy shame is the feeling that lets me know that I'm limited. If I don't have healthy shame, I'm not in touch with my basic boundary. And I'm going to show you in a minute that addicts have no boundaries because they don't have healthy shame. See, a boundary is nope, don't come any closer. Boundary, boundary. A person without boundaries is like a country without any borders. A person without boundaries is like a house that doesn't have any windows or doors or locks on the doors that anybody can walk in.
Okay, so again, I'm going to say I'm only referencing these things that John is saying, and I'm not talking about the context in which he is talking about them. I'm just saying that because Jodi posted this to her Twitter, and she shared a quote, it's obvious to me at some degree that she pulls some type of understanding or respect towards what he's talking about. Like, the main thing that I noticed was, like, the way he's talking about identity and the fact that, you know, he created this false identity of himself by being an overachiever and getting all of these accolades and all of these things, which, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you're passionate about something, that does kind of sit funny with me, because, like, if you're passionate and you feel like that's your calling, like, and maybe it is because of the life that you had as a child, and it's a reflection of that, but you wanted to be better, you know? I just don't see anything wrong with that. But nonetheless, the way that Jodi took that piece, I feel like, and, like, looked at identity, it's kind of like the same, but it's like she's wielding it like a weapon almost. Like, how she stripped Jessi of all of their identity, pulling them out of school, duct taping their mouths, taking away, and they say it, taking away anything literally that gave them identity. Because to Jodi, that's a false identity. It's Jodi strips people of their identity and then replaces it with some other narrative. Or at that point when she breaks them, then she can just create them how she wants them to be created. That's part of my take on it. Obviously, Jodi talks about setting boundaries and, like, all this other stuff in hers. I just, like, again, it just feels like she's drawing from this, but again, she takes it and puts it into her own context. One of the last things that I noticed was, like, that very beginning clip where he talks about how communication, not having appropriate communication in the home. And, like, I don't know why, but the only thing that I could think of was that clip from Paige and John Hannah. I'm just going to go ahead and play it.
This is what it looks like post ConneXions. Same circumstance, same place, different vocabulary, different tools, different principles.
Hey, I just wanted to let you know that when you're on your phone, it hits my fear that my needs don't matter. And that's why I've been so upset and so aggressive about you being on your phone. And I'm not going to do that anymore. I know that you being on your phone doesn't affect my needs mattering. And I'm just going to let you know, if you're on it, I'm going to go make sure that I'm taking care of me and not focusing on you. And you may or may not feel the distance between us, but it is going to be there because you're choosing a connection with your phone over choosing connection with me.
See, the verbiage and the language in that, to me, it just, like, it makes me so uncomfortable to watch that, because it's literally gaslighting. It's manipulation. It is. I couldn't imagine ever talking that way to my girlfriend. Like, and the fact that per Jodi and ConneXions, that is the appropriate way. That is good communication. That is what John Bradshaw in Jodi's mind is referring to, a communication in the household. I don't know. It's again, this is like a speculation piece, and she drew something from it. I guess now let's segue into this last little bit here. So remember that little segment of clip that I played at kind of the beginning of all this from the 2017 Facebook video?
Your patience. My name is Becky Berry. I'm just a volunteer.
My name is Becky Berry.
Okay, so I know there's been some stuff kind of floating around out there about who the mental fitness trainers were and kind of maybe where they are today. There has been some speculation that maybe it was Johnny, Paige's husband, who was going over and checking on Kevin in that that release in the news about there being another ConneXions counselor, which I thought was an interesting term on the topic of coaching and counseling, because as far as I understand, none of them actually have any type of education or degree in psychology, so you can't be calling yourself a counselor. But, I mean, that could be the media getting it wrong anyways, so I won't weigh into that too much, but nonetheless, but there is speculation on who that person was going over there living with Kevin. I think maybe there was original speculation that it was Pam, but I don't think that Pam would go live in with Kevin, first of all, and second of all, I'll include a link to this video of a fellow YouTuber who did a wonderful job, I think, in kind of giving a little bit of background on Stephen and Becky Berry. And also, she gives some pretty convincing evidence showing that it would be difficult geographically. She also gives some pretty decent evidence showing it would be difficult geographically for Pam to be going over there. And also evidence that maybe it was just a townhome that Kevin and Ruby maybe owned, and he was staying there, which is only a few minutes away from the family home, as well as only a few minutes away from Paige and Johnny Hannah, based off of public records. Go check out the video. Also, there's still more. Let me go ahead and play it.
I hope you felt the power in what was presented tonight. I've had the opportunity to take 3 of Jodi's classes. And I just want to remind you and point your eyes down to this paper here. This is the information that's offered here. What you heard tonight was just a sliver of what is available to learn. And I have to tell you, after 3 separate classes taking these, there are 12 classes each, 2 hours each, where you have the opportunity to connect with other people who are going through the very same experience as you are, and connect with them and learn these techniques of communication. I can't tell you how much more connected, how much more powerful my relationships are, because I am looking at myself to hold myself in truth and be humble and be impeccably honest and rigorously responsible with myself. And that has changed everything. I've been a physician in this community for 20 years. And this information has become more powerful to me than all the medications that I've been prescribing to help people find peace.
She also offers many classes, which Paige will talk about at the end.
Okay, so 3 names are mentioned in this particular video. We start with Becky Berry, we got Stephen Berry, and then at the very end there, it's just a little snippet, but Paige is mentioned. And later on in that same video, Paige actually is talking with Jodi. It's such an uncomfortable clip. I wanted to maybe include it, but it's still, we're almost getting to an hour, so I'm just going to explain it. But you got Paige, Stephen, Becky. This is all the way back to 2017. From the way that Paige talks in the example section I was just talking about, the way that Paige talks to Jodi, she's kind of in the beginning stages, I feel like, of this whole situation. And then obviously Johnny Hannah comes into it, Paige's husband, and between Stephen and Johnny, those are pretty big names to have supporting your whole platform and your business. Because Stephen's such a renowned physician in his area, he said it, 25 years. And Becky Berry and Stephen Berry, they do pretty amazing things for third world countries and things. I'm not dogging on them as people. It's just their involvement with this type of stuff is concerning, because, again, their notoriety or their status, people are going to listen to them when they say this is great for you. The other part that's concerning, and that I found while digging into all of this, is that these people are all still very much so connected, and they're still continuing this type of work in a way. And I feel it definitely is much more watered down in the stuff that I have seen. But nonetheless, you're still speaking the same crap. And the fact that you think that that type of communicating and that type of treatment is okay on any level is concerning to me. It's just concerning to me, because you got kids, you got children involved. It's to me, it's a very warped way of thinking, and that rabbit hole, going down that journey of that type of life coaching. It's like applying these emotionally almost tormenting or difficult, struggles too so much. I mean, it's overwhelming. It's exhausting. It's almost like you're creating illness in the fact that there's this like obsession around defining and identifying every minute thing and behavior and emotion. You can't. Human beings are complex as all hell, and we're vastly different from one person to the next on how we emotionally respond, react, everything. No one person is the same, and that's the beauty of humankind. And so to put this amount of pressure on people, it's going to have devastating and lasting effects. And I mean, again, this is just my opinion, but wow. And never mind the fact that like all of these mental fitness trainers that were like the original like pack of them that show up in a video on ConneXions, they're all friends with each other still. I mean, maybe there is a sense of like trauma bonding because of what they've been through. That's my speculation, but they're all interconnected. And at first I couldn't find very much of them when I searched on social media platforms and stuff. But once I found one, I was able to find all of them. Furthermore, I was able to find this particular person that is, I could not find their connection to ConneXions Classroom and like the mental fitness trainers or any of that. Like they don't appear from anything that I was able to find anywhere on the actual ConneXions side of things. However, they seem to have some connection. I believe it's with Paige Hannah. And I don't know if Paige like influenced this person or if it was just an equal relationship and this person just kind of took the things and started running with it. But just in this past year, there's posts with Johnny Hanna, Paige Hannah, Michelle Hassick. I can't remember how to say her last name. She was one of the kind of original mental fitness trainers. She appears on ConneXions Facebook a couple times back in like 2020, 2021 with her husband, Sean. She appears in a couple podcasts with this woman who is, again, continuing these types of teachings, maybe in a watered down fashion comparably to Jodi, but it's still the same stuff. It's still the same. And this type of coaching and therapy or whatever, this kind of blurring of those lines as well is so precarious and could lead to such devastation and leave an everlasting negative impact on people. And they just we're going to separate ourselves from the Jodi mess by not talking about it, not bringing up anything to do directly with ConneXions, and also now distancing themselves. Well, that was Jodi. That's not us. We're not like that. She was way too intense. She was off her rocker. She was all these things. But the foundations that you are teaching and the information that you're providing people is exactly the same stuff. Again, maybe watered down, but the problem wasn't that it was just Jodi and what she was doing with it. It's the information and the creation of this information from the beginning. Jodi created it. That's the thing. Jodi created it. And now these people are continuing it. For me, at that point, there is no way you separate yourself from that woman. There's just not, because this is her creation. She lives on through it. That's all. All right, I'm going to get off my soapbox on this one. We're going to go ahead and cut this one off. And we'll see. I know I'm leaving it on this cliffhanger of these people. I'll probably end up doing something on these guys. We'll see what I can find if there's enough information available. It just takes a little while to compile all of this stuff. And so that's why there's some time in between, because I try not to rush it. I don't want to get anything wrong. I want everything to make sense. And I try to be careful not to include anything that's not directly related or connected, or put anybody on blast. If I make a mistake, I'm human. I'm sorry. I know we're all waiting still for something more to come out and release about Ruby and Jodi and their status. We do know that the children's situation and circumstance has been sealed from the public, which I think is appropriate. But it doesn't need to be a trial by social media or a trial by public, not for those kids. But tune in for my next video. Take a look at my old videos. And I appreciate all the support.